This is Edward October, host of OctoberPod on YouTube. Hear that jingle jingle? It could be Kris Kringle, or a home invader looking for an open window, a jilted lover looking for revenge, or a disgruntled coworker hoping to spike your eggnog with arsenic. The girls of our true crime podcast are always on Santa's nice list, but the crimes they discuss are very naughty indeed. Listener discretion is advised.
Hi, Jen.
Hey, Kim. How are you? I know.
I'm good.
Ding, fries are done. Ding, fries are done.
8. We're
Day
just
8.
Cruising right along.
We are. I can't believe we're already, we're more than halfway through. Aren't
We are more than halfway.
Math is
and then,
hard.
you know
Math
what?
and words are hard.
It's true. That is true. True.
All right. Are you ready for this guy?
I'm so ready.
This guy.
Humdinger. Am I right?
He is a humdinger. I tried to get him in last year. Actually, we discussed him a little bit in day 2. We'll go over that now. This one took me forever. I actually wrote it all out and I had Loretta go over it and edit it because there's just so much and it was getting clunky and she's amazing. And so she helped me with this.
Pin boards? Like
yeah,
the police officers?
I felt like I was Tom Clancy because, you know, he's he never had an editor. No editor would work for him because he blabbed on, you know, how thick his books are. That's how I felt when writing this guy. So,
and then
he did this. Starting when he was 17, he's just a despicable human. So,
well, let's hear it. I'm going to put
right.
the seatbelt on. Let's go. Day 8
right.
coming at you.
Okay. On March 5th, 1984, a 23-year-old Orange Bowl princess named Elizabeth Beth Kenyon left the parking lot of the Coral Gables High School where she worked as a special needs teacher. Beth had also been a finalist in the Miss Florida contest in 1982. She thought pageants were a lot of fun, but her heart was with the kids that she taught. Beth waved goodbye to the security guard on duty, and it's presumed that she was headed to the gym. However, she would never make it to the gym, nor would she make it home to her apartment on Ives Dairy Road. Her roommate didn't panic when Beth failed to return home, thinking maybe she went to Pompano Beach to visit her parents. However, on the next day, when Beth failed to show up for work, the Kenyons went to the police to report their daughter missing. The police did list Beth as a missing person, but assured the Kenyons that their daughter was fine, claiming that young women her age would go away for a few days without telling their parents. They did it all the time.
Really? Because I don't know any. I don't.
Exactly.
And I have one, as do you.
Mm-hmm. Beth's parents knew that their daughter was not that irresponsible. She had a job that she loved and a close relationship with her family, and she hadn't taken anything with her that would lead to people to believe that she was taking a trip, not even her purse. Convinced that something was terribly wrong and unhappy with the apathetic attitude of the police, the Kenyons hired private investigators, a father and son duo named Ken Whittaker Sr. and Jr. So they're both named Ken Whittaker.
Kirby and Georgette.
Yep. Not that anybody would know those.
I know, but we do. And that's what matters too.
Ken Sr. was an ex-FBI chief and amazingly thorough. No clue was too small for him. Hiring them would turn out to be the most important step in this case. When the Whittakers discovered a photo album belonging to Beth, they of course asked Beth's parents to identify everyone in the photos. Her parents indicated that one of the people in the album was named Christopher Wilder, a former boyfriend of Beth's. They described him as a charming guy who'd been the perfect gentleman around their daughter and had proposed marriage before he'd even kissed her. He wanted to whisk her away to Australia where they would live the life of luxury. But while Beth liked Christopher well enough, she was only 23 and he was nearly 39, and she just wasn't interested. And so she'd turn him down. Red flag dropping. There goes one. The two PIs began canvassing the neighborhood, and it didn't take them long to make their way to the Shell station around the corner from the school. There, the attendant told the Whittakers that Beth had indeed been there. The attendant overheard her talking with another man about taking pictures of her and how they were late for their flight and needed to hurry to the airport. The older man then paid for Beth's gas, and they left. When the Whittakers showed the gas station attendant a photo of Wilder, he confirmed that that was the person he'd seen with Beth. This made Christopher Wilder a priority in Whittaker's investigation. It didn't take long for them to discover a few things about Christopher Wilder. He was a wealthy man with dual citizenship in America and Australia and owned a nice house in Boynton Beach, Florida. Christopher's house had a big pool with a map of Australia on the bottom and koala tiles around the side. He liked to be flashy, often wearing big diamond rings that turned out to be cubic zirconia and leather jackets. He drove a Cadillac and a Porsche 911 and had a speedboat docked behind his house. He would pay women to show up at nightclubs with him, one on each arm, and brag about how he was paying top dollar for them. He owned his own construction business, and he fancied himself a race car driver. His partner in the construction company said that Christopher was not much of a carpenter and that he screwed around most of the day. He also inferred that any money Christopher had was because he'd stolen it. He felt Chris had been embezzling money from the company. In addition to the construction work, though, Christopher had tried to get a job as a photographer with a talent agency in Palm Beach, but didn't get the job. However, this led Wilder having business cards made up with the agency's name on them and accruing a lot of top-notch photography equipment. This description of Christopher Wilde seemed completely at odds with how Beth Kenyon's parents described him. But what about him being a race car driver? The Whittakers discovered that Christopher Wilder had been a competitor at the Miami Grand Prix, where he'd raced his Porsche 911 just a week earlier. It just so happened that 8 days before Beth Kenyon went missing, a 20-year-old aspiring model named Rosario Gonzalez, who was handing out aspirin samples at the Grand Prix, was also last seen talking to a man fitting Christopher's description. Tall, physically fit, full beard and a mustache, thinning hair with an Australian accent. Now, what were the odds that the same man would be the last person to see two beautiful women before they went missing?
I would say not good.
Both were models, beauty pageants, somebody wants to be a photographer. Mm-hmm. Yeah. The Whittakers made an appointment to interview Christopher Wilder at his home the next day, but when they arrived, he was gone. His house was spotlessly clean, and he'd checked his dogs into a kennel. Whittaker is quoted in Duncan McNabb's book, The Snapshot Killer, as saying that Wilder's house was, quote, a very different level of clean. There was nothing in any of the trash cans. All of the surfaces were wiped down. All of the bedrooms had lightning reflectors for a model shoot, and on the dresser were stacks of photos of girls from a race in Daytona. There were 100 to 200 photos of girls in bathing suit attire, all young and attractive, and along with lots of crowd shots. But there was nothing of Beth or Rosario. On March 16, 1984, just 2 weeks after Beth Kenyon went missing, the Miami Herald ran a piece written by Pulitzer Prize award-winning journalist Edna Buchanan. Remember Shelvin Edna's books?
Oh, yeah.
The True Crime Station? Mm-hmm. The article stated that an Australian businessman who was also a local race car driver was wanted for questioning in the disappearance of two local women. Now, they didn't name him at all. Wilder knew that the Herald was talking about him, even though he went unnamed in the article. He reportedly told his business partner, quote, "The cops are after me. They want to frame me for Beth's disappearance. They don't know anything about it, but the cops don't care. They just want a fall guy, someone to take the rap. I'm not going to jail. I'm not going to do it." So it was now time to get the FBI involved and to find out just who this Christopher Wilder person was. Christopher Bernard Wilder was born on March 13, 1945 in Sydney, Australia. His father, Coley, had been an American serviceman who met Wilder's mother, June, while in Sydney during World War II. Coley Wilder had been a sailor and been involved in the Battle of Midway and Coral Sea. The couple soon added 2 more sons to their family, and after the war, the family moved around to different naval bases in the U.S. and in the Philippines. Finally, the family settled in June's hometown of Ryde, Australia. Christopher had a few brushes with death as a child. The first occurred when he stopped breathing at birth, but he was soon revived. Then again, when he was about 2, he nearly drowned and required CPR. After that, according to Wilder, he would have seizures throughout his childhood. After he got older, he took up surfing, and surfing turned this puny kid into an athletic adult. And he wasn't the best student, and he had difficulty adjusting to Australian schools. He preferred American sports and had an American accent, but with his blonde hair and athletic body, he found it was easy for him to pick up girls, and that his American accent didn't hurt either. And see, I think an Australian accent is better, but, you always like what you don't get, right?
I would take the Australian accent.
On January 4th, 1963, Christopher Wilder committed his first documented sexual offense. While on a trip to Manly Beach, Christopher and 2 of his friends started flirting with a couple of girls. Children, actually. One of them was only 13 years old. Christopher would have been almost 18 at the time. They abducted the 13-year-old and took her to Beacon Hill Quarry. When the girl tried to escape from the car, Chris instructed his friends to hold her down.
She's 13.
She's
Can you even
13.
flirt with a 13-year-old?
You shouldn't even talk to a 13-year-old.
No.
Once at the abandoned quarry, the 2 other boys got out of the car and pretended not to notice what was happening as Chris raped the girl in the back seat. The 2 other boys did nothing to help her, but they didn't participate in the assault either. Later, they dropped the girl off at her home as if nothing devastating had just happened to the poor girl.
They're just as bad.
They are.
Okay,
they're accomplices. They didn't do it, but they let it do it.
But they let it happen.
Mm-hmm. Just as bad. Not surprisingly, a month later, on February 11th, Christopher Wilder and his two accomplices were arrested for rape and carnal knowledge, which, of course, means sexual intercourse. The old-fashioned. Christopher would claim that although he participated in the attack, he had never physically assaulted her. Not surprisingly, Christopher's lawyer blamed the victim, and Christopher's father told the court that his son felt, quote, strong guilt feeling about his offense. The probation officer came to Chris's defense, stating, quote, the lad has been associating with surf boys at Manly and was drawn into the offense by his associates. It's so aggravating. Christopher Wilder was given a 12-month suspended sentence. Wilder would later tell everybody that he was unwillingly involved in this, quote, gang rape, and that he had to undergo electric shock therapy as a result.
Correct me if I'm wrong, wasn't he the only one?
Yes, he was. You're correct.
I thought so. I just want to make sure.
However, Duncan McNabb states in his book, quote, the therapy wasn't ordered by the court on conviction, nor did the man I interview recall it. And the report by the psychiatrist has no recommendation for such a significant step, nor any reason that would even suggest that that was a good idea. So I think he's quite a liar.
His pants are on fire.
I know. It's possible that Wilder did undergo some sort of shock therapy at the time. It's just contributed to this particular incident. One thing is clear. Tying a person to a table and shocking them with electricity eventually became one of his fantasies and a method of torture that he would inflict on more than one victim.
No.
In January of 1964, Christopher Wilde met 2 women on Manly Beach in Australia. 2 sisters, aged 15 and 20, who have never been publicly identified. They were spending the day with their parents, and for the sake of narrative classifications, we'll call the 20-year-old Rita, okay? Rita and Chris began dating, and within months, Christopher wanted to take nude photos of Rita, and when she said no, he threatened to rape her, because that gets you, that does it. Rita's parents didn't like Christopher all that much, since he seemed to focus a lot of his attention on the younger 15-year-old sibling. And sometimes, when left alone with Rita's mother, he would flirt and make advances towards her as well.
Red flags, plenty.
And one would think that her parents dislike of the boyfriend Christopher would have put Rita off, but instead, she married him.
No, she did not.
The marriage was brief and an unhappy one, with Christopher demanding that Rita have sex with him 3 times a day. How do you get any work done? That's what I want to know. If she denied him, he would get violent. And at one point, Rita found photographs and negatives in one of the bedroom doors depicting nude and semi-nude young women. She also found a list of women's names with personal information, such as their addresses, phone numbers, and what looked like their measurements and marital statuses. Rita left shortly thereafter when she felt her life was in danger, because once when she was driving to work, the brakes went out on her car. Another time, the steering failed, and she ran off the road. Then there was the time that Rita was taking a nap, only to wake up to the nauseating smell of gas. She made her way to the kitchen where she found one of the stove burners turned on, with no flame. Christopher was sitting calmly outside and claimed he didn't smell any gas.
Yeah, he was waiting.
Yeah. Their marriage lasted a week.
Nuh-uh.
1 week.
That was it?
Mm-hmm. All of that, yeah. In November of 1967, Christopher Wilder approached an 18-year-old nursing student on Stein Beach in Manly. Nursing student on Stein Beach at Manly. It's through this incident that Christopher's modus operandi would be cemented. Wilder claimed to be a fashion photographer and offered to take photos of her to help start her modeling career. He thought she was beautiful and perfect for the job. The woman initially agreed, but said no when he wanted to go to a different beach. Never let them take you to a second location. We all know this. He told her that the vision he had for the photos would be better at this other beach. So, feeling as though he was trustworthy and nice looking, she complied.
See, that nice looking throws you off, I'm telling you. And the scariest people look normal. That's
I know. When he was driving her back to Stein Beach, he stopped at the Australian rules football field and said he wanted to take a few locker room shots. He told her to get into the shower and remove her clothes, which she didn't want to do, but out of fear, she complied once again. Christopher only stopped taking photos once the woman began to cry. What followed was several months of Christopher stalking this woman. He wanted her to meet him at the beach again, and when she refused, he threatened to publish these nude photos of her. So, she agreed. This time, Christopher wanted to recruit other women on the beach to be models for him. She agreed to that, too. One of the last times they met was in a suburb of Sydney, where Christopher drove her to a house and raped her in the bedroom. On February 6, 1968, Christopher made the mistake of calling the woman at her house instead of her job. When her mother inquired about the American man that had called her, the woman broke down and told the mother everything. And then they went to the police. When questioned by police, Chris admitted having intercourse with the woman, but claimed that she didn't really stop him. The police wanted to press charges, but the woman refused. Without evidence or testimony from the victim, the police had no choice but to let Wilder go. In February,
she was scared. Was she scared?
She was. He had photos of her, and he.
But even more than that, like what he would do. I'm
sure he threatened.
Yeah,
lots to kill her
like to
and
hurt
everything.
her.
That's his MO. In February 1969, Rita's mother, Wilder's former mother-in-law for that whole week, contacted police stating that she thought Christopher Wilder should be considered a suspect in the Wanda Beach murders, which is what we covered in last year's in The Nightmare Before Christmas. It was the second case.
We did.
Mm-hmm. She explained everything that had happened to her daughter, but Wilder was never interviewed. A note on the Wanda Beach case filed in November of 1965 stated that they had made efforts to locate Wilder for an interview, but to no avail. To this day, Wilder is still considered a strong suspect in the Wanda Beach murders, which happened in 1965, 2 years after Wilder's first sexual assault of the 13-year-old girl.
I believe it.
Mm-hmm. And you want to know why he couldn't be located? Wilder took advantage of his dual citizenship and flew to Fort Lauderdale, Florida, escaping any consequences for any of his actions.
So they didn't, take his passport or anything?
No.
What?
Just wait. So,
Jen, you and I are not very smart. I'm going to tell you that right now.
I know.
We are not very smart. But certain things just are kind of glaring.
I want to think that maybe they're naive. It's 1969.
No.
They're not
people
thinking.
Run all time.
I know.
All time.
But they didn't. But he escaped to Fort Lauderdale. He escaped any consequences, and he lived in Fort Lauderdale with his grandmother while he worked in construction to make money.
Mm-hmm.
So Wilde learned nothing from his near misses in Australia. In fact, he was just getting started.
I was just going to say, it just gave him more power.
Uh-huh. In March of 1971, he was arrested in Pompano Beach for soliciting women to pose for nude photos. He arranged a plea deal, pled guilty, and was convicted of disorderly conduct and fined $15 plus court costs. Roughly about $185 today.
Yeah.
In 1974, Wilder drugged and raped a teenage girl after luring her into his car, promising to take portfolio photos of her. He was arrested.
There's so many people that fall for that.
I know. Everybody wants to be told they're pretty and they can be a model, especially when you're young and naive. Well, hell, even older people. What am I saying? I would probably fall for it.
I would like to have somebody
on
tell
some
me
low
I'm pretty.
self-esteem days, maybe. Yeah.
I don't want to go anywhere with strangers to take photos. I wouldn't fall for that, but I would like that you're pretty. I'll take that.
I know. Well, Wilder was arrested and given probation for that incident. He raped her and he was given probation. In 1977, Wilder forced a high school girl to perform oral sex on him, saying that he would beat her up if she refused. Before trial, he was evaluated by a court-appointed psychiatrist who rendered a chilling assessment of him. Wilder was found to be, quote, a mentally disordered sex offender and, quote, not safe except in a structured environment. The report said that Wilder should be confined. Even so, Wilder was acquitted and was a free man once again.
Not to back this up, but I'm backing it up. If some person threatened you with your life to perform oral sex on them, why would you not just bite it off? I'm serious.
Oh, she's a young girl.
Scared
high
to
schooler.
death, I guess.
Scared. I mean, could have been out in the middle of nowhere too, you know?
Yeah, but you bite that sucker off, you're not going to go well. For him or her, probably.
In 1980, Wilder approached a woman offering her a modeling job. It ended with him raping her, of course. He was arrested. He was given another 5 years of probation and court-ordered therapy.
You just get probation for a rape?
He did in 1980 in Florida. But in December of 1982, Christopher Wilder somehow managed to convince a judge to let him break that probation and go back to Australia to visit his parents.
What could go wrong?
While he was there, he abducted and bound two 15-year-olds and forced them to pose nude for photos. He was arrested, charged with kidnapping and indecent assault, and given a $350,000 bond. Some sources say it was a $400,000 bond, which his family paid. Wilder's court date was slated for May of 1983, but it was delayed until April of 1984. Christopher Wilder was allowed to return to the U.S. as long as he promised to return for his court date.
I don't, there's no words. I don't even know. It's like, which one's dumber?
I know.
Them or the U.S. or like, what?
I know. Well, it appears that both the U.S. and Australia was pretty keen on shoving Wilder off to the other country to take care of him.
I understand. That I get.
Without any thought whatsoever. Mm-hmm. To the trail of broken women he was leaving in his wake. Now, in March of 1984, he was the last person seen with Beth Kenyon and Rosario Gonzalez, both beautiful, intelligent women with bright futures ahead of them. Both were gone without a trace. It also appeared that Christopher Wilder, having put his dogs in a kennel and drained his bank account, was on the run. See why? We're just starting. We're just starting it.
How did this person get away with this for this long?
Failure of two countries' government or legal systems and really good defense lawyers. About 2 hours north of Boynton Beach, Florida, in Merritt Island, 21-year-old Teresa Waite Ferguson had gone to the Merritt Square Mall about 20 miles from her home in Indian Harbor Beach, Florida. She went to do a little shopping. Teresa, known as Terry, never arrived home after her trip to the mall on March 21st. Terry's stepfather, who was a local police chief, found her car parked at the mall, and witnesses stated that they saw Terry leave the mall with a man fitting Wilder's description. That same day Terry disappeared, Wilder called for a tow truck to remove his vehicle from a sandy area along a remote Lover's Lane type place in Canaveral Groves, which is about 20 miles northeast of the mall. Wilder was alone. On March 23rd, her stepfather was notified by one of his own police dispatchers that a body had been found face down in the snake-infested swamp about 100 miles east. She had been so severely beaten that she could only be identified through dental records. Whereas Beth Kenyon and Rosario Gonzalez were missing, Terry Ferguson was very much dead. Investigators now knew that Wilder was not only capable of murder, but that Terry was most likely not his first. But while investigators were dealing with the recovery of Terry Ferguson's body, Florida State University student Linda Grover, aged 19, was enduring a nightmare of monumental proportions. On March 20th, Wilder approached Linda Grover twice while shopping at Governor Square Mall in Tallahassee, Florida. He gave her his carefully planned and usually successful speech about being a fashion photographer and how he could make her a star, and if she would just please pose for some photos. All she needed, he would make her a star. Wilder didn't know that Linda really didn't care about fashion and beauty and being a star. She liked to surf. She was a surfer. She was athletic. She didn't like any of that stuff. She told him she wasn't interested both times. The third time he approached her was in the parking lot. He offered to show Linda his portfolio, and this time she thought she'd just humor him. But this time, he punched her and shoved her into his car. He took her across state lines to a Georgia motel room where he shaved her private parts, raped her, and tortured her. He superglued her eyes shut and used a scalding hairdryer to dry the glue and harden it. Then he hooked her up to a homemade torture device that delivered 10 seconds of electrical shocks to her body. If she screamed, he threatened to make it 30 seconds. This went on for hours. In between torturing and raping Linda, Wilder would watch his favorite television shows like Dallas. While Christopher was distracted with JR and Bobby Ewing on the TV, Linda noticed that if she tried to open her eyes really, really wide, she could see a glimpse of the room. And she could see where he was and where the door was. And she decided to try to make a run for it. She found out that the door was locked. Wilder pounced on her and wrestled her to the ground and hit her over the head with the hairdryer. Linda played dead for about a minute, and when Wilder least expected it, she jabbed her fingers into his eyes.
Good.
And this move gave her just a precious few seconds to get away from him and to make it into the bathroom. There she locked herself inside and began screaming and pounding on the doors and walls. This made Wilder panic, and he grabbed his belongings and he ran out of the hotel room. Linda Grover stepped out of the bathroom into an empty hotel room. She was free. After calling for help, Linda identified Christopher Bernard Wilder in a lineup as her kidnapper and rapist. When David Walden got a phone call on March 21st from the daycare center that his wife, Terry Walden, had failed to pick up their daughter, he immediately knew something was terribly wrong. He called the police and informed them that his wife had gone to the mall and was supposed to be home by 1:30 in the afternoon. He also told him that his wife had been approached a few days prior at the same mall by a man who wanted her to pose for photos. Unfortunately, Terry Walden's body was dragged from an irrigational canal outside of Beaumont a few days later on March 26. She had been severely beaten about the face and endured 3 stab wounds to her chest, 2 of which went all the way through her body. There was no sign of sexual assault, but her bra was missing. And so was her 1981 Mercury Cougar, which Wilder had taken for himself. In the meantime, police officer found Christopher Wilder's abandoned car and discovered fibers that indisputably linked Wilder to the murder of Terry Ferguson. The FBI was tracking the credit card that Wilder was using, which belonged to his business partner. And in the 1980s, credit cards had to be called in for approval number, right? Especially over if it was $100. The problem was that most businesses didn't do that until a day or two later, which meant that Wilder was always a day or two ahead of the FBI. The only thing they knew for sure was the direction in which he was heading. I remember calling in those, like, you had to, the carbons, and you run it through that little slidey machine.
Yep.
Mm-hmm. On March 25th, newlywed Susan Logan went to Penn Square Mall in Oklahoma City to do some shopping, and she never came home. When her husband Brian reported her missing, because the couple was having financial difficulties, Susan had just abandoned her otherwise happy life and ran away. While it's not a crime for an adult to be missing, one has to wonder how the police can ignore when a perfectly healthy 21-year-old's family and friends tell them that this behavior is not normal for their loved ones. The next day, Susan Logan's body, tied with nylon cord and duct tape, was found in a reservoir near Junction City, Kansas. She had been stabbed and beaten and suffered bite marks on both breasts. Aside from bruising on her legs, it was also obvious that she'd been sexually assaulted. Her body was not identified until April 6th. Wilder's next victim was 18-year-old Cheryl Bonaventura, another aspiring model. On March 29th, a shopper at a mall in Grand Junction, Colorado, saw Christopher Wilder approaching women, identifying himself as a fashion photographer. Around 1:30 in the afternoon, a friend of Cheryl's saw her talking to a man in the parking lot who was leaning in her car window. Cheryl would also be seen at a local restaurant with Wilder 100 miles south of Silverton, Colorado. There, she told a waitress that they were heading to Las Vegas. Then she was again seen at the Four Corners Monument with Wilder telling everybody that they were newlyweds. The last time she was seen alive was in a hotel in Page, Arizona. Cheryl's body was found almost 2 months later, just 55 miles north of Page, Arizona in Kanab, Utah. She had multiple stab wounds and a gunshot wound. This was the first time Wilder introduced a gun to his crime spree. On April 1st, 1984, Michelle Korfman was at Meadow Mall in Las Vegas, Nevada. Michelle's parents had initially had reservations about letting Michelle drive the 30 minutes to Las Vegas by herself since she was only 17 years old. But their daughter was fairly responsible and super excited about the opportunity to participate in a fashion show competition sponsored by 17 magazine. The possibility of having the chance to being 17's new cover girl was a dream come true. When Michelle didn't return home, the police were called. Witnesses told police that Michelle was seen leaving with a man who had been hanging around the competition. And at that point, the police requested that all photographers at the event turn over their photographs. And there was a photograph of Christopher Wilde sitting on the sidelines, staring at all the beautiful girls on the runway. And the picture is fairly common right now. It's creepy as hell. Michelle's body was found on May 11th, just off of Southern California Highway in Angeles National Park. Due to her body being exposed to the elements for so long, they could only identify her through dental records nearly a month later. The cause of death was suffocation. She had aspirated on soil, meaning Wilder had most likely held her face into the earth until she died. 2 days after Michelle went missing on April 3rd, the FBI finally placed Christopher Bernard Wilder on the FBI's 10 most wanted list. At that point, he was suspected of at least 1 kidnapping, 3 murders, and 4 disappearances. He was considered, quote, a significant danger to the public, to say the least. The very next day, 16-year-old Tina Risico went to Del Amo Fashion Center in Terrace, California to apply for a job at Hickory Farms. Wilder approached her and claimed to work with a modeling agency, and he felt that after she lost a few pounds, she'd make a wonderful model. He wanted to take a few photos of her and talk to her mother later about letting Tina come to work for his agency. He said that he would even pay her for the photos, and he handed her a $100 bill. The two left them all together in a Mercury Cougar that Wilder had stolen from Terry Walden in Texas. Christopher took Tina to a quiet place near a pier for the photography shoot. Tina became very uncomfortable when Wilder ordered her to take off her bra and sweater and put on a white jacket that he had brought along, but she complied. Then they moved to a new location for more photos. He took her to a secluded dirt road in the Santa Ana Mountains. When they got out of the car, Tina turned to face Wilder and saw that he was pointing a revolver at her. He put the gun to her mouth and told her that he would have no problem killing her because he'd done it before. He then raped her. Afterwards, he tied her up, blindfolded her, and told her that if she wanted to stay alive, she needed to act natural and not resist him in any way. Wilder drove them to the El Dorado Motel in El Centro, California, where he raped her again. Tina's time with Wilder was full of rape, torture, and threats of being sold to a sex trafficking ring. He used the electric shock torture on her, as well as making dozens of small cuts all over her body. Tina not only complied with everything that he asked her to do, she also listened to him and carried on normal conversations with him. And somehow this girl managed to get Wilder to like her. Tina's mother reported her missing on April 5th, 1984. Still, the police assumed that she was a runaway, partly because her father had told them that Tina was unhappy where she lived and had talked about running away. In the meantime, their daughter fought for her life as Wilder's cross-country companion. The Mexican border was less than a day's drive from where they were in California, and nobody is really sure why Wilder just didn't cross into Mexico, considering the fact that he knew he was wanted by the police. Instead, he started heading back east. He drove through Arizona, Missouri, and Illinois, all with the terrified Tina by his side, learning what it took to keep him happy. In reference to his court date, Wilder made the Australian newspaper headlines with, "Kidnap rape suspect jumps $400,000 bail." You know, one would think that it could have read, "Kidnap rape suspect wanted for murder across the U.S." But
they put the money thing in there.
Yeah, and that he jumped bail. Who would have thought if you let a guy leave the country, he would jump bail?
Shocking, I know.
I know. After her 6th day in captivity with Wilder, the pair drove to a mall in Gary, Indiana on April 10th. Wilder told her that she would help him find a new girl there. After a week of torture, rape, and threats, Tina did exactly as she was instructed. 16-year-old Dawnette Wilt followed Wilder and Tina to Wilder's car. Wilder put a gun on Dawnette and told her to get into the back seat or he'd kill her. During the 2 days he held Dawnette, she suffered the same rape and torture as Tina had. Often, Tina had no choice but to watch the rape of the girl she lured into Wilder's car. It was during this time that Wilder saw Tina's mother on Good Morning America begging for her daughter's return. Promising to send Tina home, Wilder left the motel at 8 a.m. with Tina and Dawnette. Forcing Tina to drive, he instructed her to head towards Rochester, New York. Wilder told Tina to stop the car when they drove through a secluded wooded area. He then took Dawnette, bound and blindfolded with duct tape, into the woods. There he sexually assaulted her one last time before trying to suffocate her. Dawnette fought back with all of her strength. When Wilder pulled his knife and decided to stab her, Dawnette begged him not to. She told him that he could kill her any way he wanted to, but please don't stab her. But he did it anyway. He left her in the woods, climbed in the car, and sped away. Only Wilder began to worry that he hadn't stabbed her enough times, and after driving about 15 minutes, he turned the car around and went back to check that Dawnette was indeed dead. His instincts had been right, but to his horror, Dawnette was no longer where he left her to die.
Good. Oh my gosh, I hope she made it.
Truck driver Charlie Larson could barely believe his eyes when he saw a terrified and blood-soaked Dawnette running down the road, begging for someone to help her. She had managed to remove the duct tape, and she had taken it and tied it around her chest, trying to staunch the bleeding. She'd saved herself. She made herself a tourniquet out of that duct tape. He stopped his truck and drove her to the nearest hospital, and once there, the doctors were able to perform surgery to save her life. In the meantime, Christopher Wilder knew that if Dawnette survived, she'd be able to tell them what sort of car he was driving. He had to get a new automobile immediately, so he headed to Eastview Mall. It's at that mall that Wilder abducts a 33-year-old mother by the name of Beth Dodge, and the only reason he did was to steal her car. At gunpoint, Wilder forced her into the backseat of her gold Pontiac Firebird. Tina followed him in the other car for about 30 miles, and that's when Wilder pulled over, walked Beth Hodge into the woods, forced her on her knees, and shot her in the back.
Why wouldn't he just drop her off and say run?
He's a killer. Leaving the Cougar where he killed Beth, he took the Firebird and headed east to I-90 with Tina in tow. As Wilder was driving, he heard on the radio that Dawnette had been found alive and had identified her attacker as Christopher Wilder. Every police officer and FBI agent was now looking for him. As we know, Wilder had promised Tina that he was going to get her home, right?
I hope he does. I hope so. I want her to live.
As they're driving, Wilder makes a side trip to Boston, and that's where he buys Tina a ticket for the first flight to L.A. Wilder asked her not to tell authorities that what he was driving or what he, anything. He told her that he cared for her and he wasn't sure how he'd become to be as how he was, and that he would kill himself rather than be taken by police.
Mm-hmm.
And honestly, he said he didn't want her to be around when he died.
Not to see him?
Yeah, he didn't want her to see him take his life.
He thought she loved him too somehow. In
somehow.
Some weird warped way.
It was then he kissed her on the cheek and she walked onto the plane.
Oh my god.
And he walked back to the car. And having been programmed for the past week and surely a victim of Stockholm Syndrome, Tina complied. His last words to her were, quote, "All you got to do, kid, is write a book."
What?
He told her,
write a book, make money off of the case.
Then he walked away. And on his way to the Canadian border, Christopher Wilder tried to abduct one more woman near Beverly, Massachusetts. Luckily, she was able to run away. Wilder decided not to chase her and pressed on to Canada. It's really weird because she got on the plane. Tina got on the plane, didn't tell anybody anything.
She was probably in shock. She
went
was probably
home,
thinking it was a trick.
Right. Once she landed, she went to the store, got clothes, got everything she needed. She went to her boyfriend's house. She showered. And only then, the next afternoon, did she go to the police. Yeah.
I would be thinking probably she was in shock and she's thinking he's following me to see if I'm going to do this.
And I'm sure she did have Stockholm Syndrome. Yeah. I'm sure she, at that point, her mind. Mm-hmm. On Friday the 13th, 1984, 2 state troopers in an unmarked car noticed a man standing in a gas station parking lot, and this man was watching them fairly closely. So Trooper Wayne Fortier and Trooper Leo Jellison pulled into the station. They recognized him as Christopher Wilder. As they approached the gold Firebird, Wilder reached into the car and grabbed his .357 Magnum. Officer Jellison grabbed Wilder from behind and pinned his arms close to his ribcage. Within seconds, the gun went off. Backing away, Jellison realized that not only had Wilder been shot, but the bullet had exited Wilder's body and into his own. A second shot from Wilder's gun pierced Wilder's body a few seconds later. It appeared that Christopher Wilder had kept his word about suicide and was now dead. Trooper Jellison would make a full recovery from his injuries.
Thank goodness.
While Christopher Wilder's reign of terror was over for him, the public, and law enforcement, it would never end for the parents of the victims whose bodies were never found. Beth Kenyon and Rosario Gonzalez's bodies have never been recovered. That's where the story ended, except it really didn't. There is a list of missing and murdered women believed to be Christopher Wilder's victims. I think it's worse. The body of 16-year-old Tammy Alexander from New York disappeared in Florida in 1979. Her body was found wearing a race car jacket. In 1981, Mary Oppitz and Mary Hare both disappeared from the same mall in Fort Myers, Florida, less than a week apart. Tina Marie Beebe disappeared from South Florida in 1981 after leaving with a man who promised her a job as a model. Her body was found, along with an unidentified woman in 1982, on property owned by Christopher Wilder in Loxahatchee, Florida. That's it, I think. Loxahatchee, Florida.
Sounds about right.
In 1983, Sherry Lynn Ball left her house on June 27th to meet a friend in Boynton Beach. Then she went to New York to pursue a modeling career. A few days later, Sherry called her boyfriend, saying she and her friend were in Ashland, Virginia at a truck stop, confirming that she and this friend were headed to New York and she was going to be a model. She was never heard from again, and her body was found 4 months later, but she remained a Jane Doe until 2014. Nancy K. Brown went missing while vacationing in Cocoa Beach, Florida in 1983. Her body was found in 1984 at the exact same field in Canaveral Groves where Terry Ferguson had been dumped. On July 6th of 1983, 18-year-old actress, model, and beauty queen Tammy Lynn Leppert demanded to be dropped off near the Glass Bank building in Cocoa Beach, Florida, after having a heated argument with a friend. Tammy had a few small parts in the movies Little Darling, Spring Break, and Scarface. She had also won over 280 beauty pageants, and she was on the cover of CoverGirl magazine in 1978. She was never seen again. And while many people believe her disappearance was unrelated to Christopher Wilder, others still list him as a possible suspect. In March 15th, 1984, in Daytona Beach, at the beginning of Wilder's killing spree, 15-year-old Colleen Osborne skipped school to go to the mall and the beach. Her mother reported her missing, which of course was not taken seriously, because what have we learned this year? It's never really taken seriously, or was never taken seriously. The police assumed that she was a runaway. Of all the presumed cases of Christopher Wilde's, this one was most likely to be his. He was staying at Daytona Beach on the exact same day Colleen went missing. Her body was found a few weeks later, and since the pathologist could not find evidence of a fracture Colleen had as a child, they assumed it wasn't Colleen. She was a Jane Doe until 2011, when DNA tests confirmed her identity. Even though there is no evidence linking her to Christopher Wilder, the coincidence of him being in Daytona and knowing how he would often pick his victims from the malls or beaches, it seems highly likely that he could be responsible for her death. Then, of course, we've already discussed the Wanda Beach murders in 1965 in Australia. Finally, in July of 1983, two sisters aged 10 and 12 were coerced into a white El Camino by a man claiming he would make them models if they would just get in the car. After they got into the vehicle, he pulled a gun on them, drove them to a deserted dirt road, raped and beat them until their eyes were black and blue. He then returned them back to the place that he abducted them from. The girl described the car as a white El Camino with a construction sign on the side of it, and police felt Wilder couldn't be responsible for this rape because the victims were a little too young for Wilder's tastes. I just want you to know that after these girls got back from the hospital, a man kept calling the house asking for the oldest of the two sisters, and it was him. Just gross. However, a year later, a police officer constructed a photo lineup, and both girls immediately identified Wilder as the man who had assaulted them. And what's more, they had described him as having an accent, and Wilder's construction partner confirmed that Wilder did drive a white El Camino at the time, with the sign of it advertising their construction company. And then later, recently, the girl's mother revealed that she did know Christopher Wilder. They were just like acquaintances, but she admitted that she did know him. The girls both think that the mother might have met him out at a bar or a club.
Mm-hmm. But just in passing, right? He didn't come over and hang out or anything, right?
Right. No. Just in passing. It would be like you would go to a bar that you normally go to, and somebody would be there.
A regular, yeah.
Mm-hmm. Unfortunately, it'll never be known just how many victims Christopher Wilder had, but we can safely assume that there are many yet to be discovered, and some that will never be known. The frustrating part in this case, once again, is just how the justice system completely failed at every turn, both in the U.S. and Australia. At the time of his death, Christopher Wilder's estate was valued at $7 million. The court ruled that the money would be divided amongst the victims' families after taxes. And that's it. It's not enough. He's something. I mean, it just keeps going on. And if you read the Snapshot Killer, the Duncan McNabb's book, he's got a friend that describes how she woke up one night and it was like he was at a trance at the foot of her bed just staring at her. It just creepy stuff.
She should be lucky. Thank her stars that
exactly
she wasn't a victim.
That she escaped his wrath.
But surprised more people don't know about him. I mean, maybe they do. I don't know, but ooh.
No, I've known about him for a while, and the picture of him sitting at the one modeling competition and he's right by the runway and he's looking up, and the picture is actually in the forefront is the runway, and it's just pictures of the girls' legs walking, and then he's right in the middle of it looking up at the girls. It's just creepy, and then knowing what we know about him and kind of the look on the face, you can read into it as he was just a mess.
Not a nice person.
Some bitch. And he did the right thing. That's all I'm saying. But screw Australia and the U.S., the courts, for letting him go as much as they did. It could have been stopped easily the first time.
Oh, yeah. Well, I'm sure they were like, have it be your problem. Each of them, right? So we'll let you handle it. And they're like, yeah, we'll let you handle it. And then neither handled it.
Yeah. You know what? Your parents paid $400,000 to, sure, you can leave the country.
Also, how did he get $7 million? Like, where did he get $7 million to his name?
He worked construction and he finagled and he just built a little empire. The first house that he bought, I think he got it for cheap and then built it up because he worked construction, so he could do that himself. And it was a pretty nice house for where the location. It was like right on a canal. It was on water, so that's immediately going to value it high. Yeah, it was mostly in real estate. That's how he made the money. Real estate and construction.
I'm glad he didn't live to see it. I spend it.
Yeah.
Still not worth it, though. Wow, that is an A date for you. That is a day 8 for you.
And trust me, thanks to Loretta, and this is long, and Loretta pared it down because I had it nice, long, and clunky because there's just so much to it.
Well, and I'm like back and forth and then going everywhere. Yeah. Massachusetts, Florida, back to Australia.
Arizona. No, I know. So
through Joplin, Missouri, for goodness sake.
I know.
Wow.
He was a mess.
And those are the victims we know about. And you, as we've said a million times, you know there's more. You know there is.
Oh, yeah.
And we'll never know.
Yeah. And there's, it's just
absolutely awful.
One day, I just hope all the victims that, I'm glad a lot of those Jane Does that were found, thanks to DNA, were identified and their family get closure. We can always hope that for everybody. So anyway, that's day 8. It was long.
Day 8, Jen.
Yes.
Woo! That's a something.
Convoluted. But seriously, pick up the book, The Snapshot Killer, Duncan McNabb. It's Australian. You can get it on Amazon. There's also a bunch of documentaries on him that you can watch, like FBI files and all that kind of stuff. But they only go through half. They never really go through the Australian part.
That's interesting,
isn't
it?
They only go through the U.S. where he starts on the run.
Good job, Jen. I appreciate that.
Thanks to Loretta, man. We'd still be here recording if Loretta didn't help out.
Thank goodness.
So,
yeah. All right. Well,
anyway, that's day 8. We got day 9 tomorrow.
We're going to see you tomorrow. Same bat time, same bat channel. Because it's day 9 tomorrow. Boy, we're closing in on those holidays. Let me tell you.
I know. I hope everybody's gotten all their stuff done, or at least fairly start. How about you? Are you guys done? Are you done with everything you need to do?
No, I've wrapped stuff. I've wrapped a few things.
Have you?
Yeah. That's about it.
We still have we still have to plan our menu out and see what we're going to do.
No.
We normally go to my dad's on Christmas Eve, and then we just stay here with the family on Christmas. So we have to do our own meal.
Well, I like that. So, keep your
which
fat
I'm
pants
just happy
on and just eat, graze all day. That's the way to
honestly,
go.
I'm just happy I'd take leftovers from my dad's and have them the next day. That's easy. That would be for me instead of having to make a whole meal.
New food. Mm-hmm.
Then I'd have to cook it. I don't want to cook it. I want somebody else to do it for me. I should have been Jen, rich in another life.
You should have. I know. We all should have. We all should have, Jen.
Yeah.
All our listeners, too. But until you're rich, or tomorrow, whichever comes first, Jen, remember, lock your door.
Keep passing by those open windows.
Bye-bye.
Love ya. Today's episode was researched and written by me, Jen. For more information about this episode, as well as all other sources, please check out our show notes or the podcast website at ourtruecrimepodcast.com. Our True Crime Podcast is developed and created by the hosts, Jen and Cam. Original music and audio mix of all our True Crime Podcast episodes is courtesy of Nico Vertesi from We Talk of Dreams. You can reach Nico at wetalkofdreams.com. Listener discretion is provided by Edward October from OctoberPod VHS. You can find all of his great works on YouTube. Please make sure to like and subscribe to our True Crime Podcast wherever you listen to your podcasts. We can be reached on Instagram and Facebook at Our True Crime Podcast or on Twitter with the handle at Our True Crime Pod. You can also email us at ourtruecrimepodcast@gmail.com. We would also at this time like to thank our patrons. We would be so lost without you. Thank you so much. And if you would like to help support the show, you can check us out on patreon.com/Our True Crime Podcast. You can also show your support by leaving a 5-star review on Apple or simply just tell your friends about us. It's that easy. Love ya.